Thank you. I'm really excited to be here, and honestly, this is my first time in Ontario. I'm from San Diego, so it's taking quite an adjustment. So, as you said, I'm from the Council on Sustainable Aviation Fuels Accountability, which is quite a long name, so I will use COSAFA through the rest of the presentation today. But what COSAFA is, it's a council made up of the business and commercial aviation industry globally coming together to look at SAF markets, supporting and developing SAF markets, and what the accounting looks like. So with that, we're going to deliver on market desire for SAF. Framing the discussion, I'm going to kind of build this conversation. So we're going to start with high demand and low supply. SAF is in high demand and low supply. That sounds positive. It represents large biomass opportunities, also another positive. Yet there's barriers to investment despite the incentives available. I would be remiss if I only talked about the challenges without talking about how to overcome these barriers. So we're going to discuss how we overcome those barriers with claims accounting. On the surface level, here is what the high demand and low supply. So we have ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization. Last year at the 41st Assembly, they committed to a long-term aspirational goal, which is net zero carbon emissions for international aviation by 2050. Business aviation, commercial aviation have made similar commitments, all supporting that. And you can see I have Air Canada on there as well, net zero greenhouse gas emissions goal for all of global operations by 2050. This is very high level. So what does this look like in a numbers form? The S&P Global Commodities has put some numbers to what this looks like. So by 2050, SAF demand could be 66.2 billion liters. That's a growth of 17.3% from today. That's 27 years. So that's quite large. If you break this down by year, so 2022, this chart is kind of hard to see, but the top is the supply, what we have expected supply to be based off of announcements that have been made so far. Below that are targets that have been set based off of national targets or industry organizations of what they expect to be here. So we can see in 2025, it's actually supply is over what those targets are expected, but that takes a quick reversal as we go from 2030, 2040, and 2050. The targets far exceed what expected supply is supposed to be. So looking at the biomass opportunities that have been announced in 3 different regions. So we'll look at the US, Europe, and the UK, and then Canada. So the US has the SAF Grand Challenge, which has been highly talked about, 3 billion gallons by 2030, 35 billion gallons by 2050. If you look at what current announcements are, we're only hitting 2.2 billion gallons by 2030. So I like to see this as an opportunity. We didn't fall short. There's 0.8 billion gallon opportunity there as we approach 2030. The UK, based off of their mandates, are expecting demand to reach 1.5 billion gallons by 2030. Announcements are only showing a 1.2 billion gallons being produced. Again, that's an opportunity of 0.3 billion gallons. And Canada's Aviation Climate Action Plan is looking at 10% by 2030. So that is 1 billion liters. The CSAF roadmap has projected that there's 500 million liter announcements. Admittedly, they say that's very optimistic. That's if everything that produced renewable diesel now produced SAF. So optimistically, that's 500 million, and we have a 500 million liter opportunity there for biomass. These look positive, but there are some major barriers to investment. SAF is expensive. The commercial airlines space is competitive. I, as a traveler, I'm sure many of you do not like to pay extra for tickets, and you shop between airlines looking at what those tickets. So who is going to pay those premiums for SAF and those costs? Additionally, when we're looking at SAF transactions, with such a nascent field, SAF is actually less than 1% of all aviation fuel. There's significant friction in those transactions. How do you know what you're buying? How do you know what you can use it for? So this market confusion is slowing down and adding cost to these transactions. And second, as we all know, it's expensive to build SAF facilities, and it takes a long time. Investors need stability. They need those long-term offtake agreements and policy support. So we're going to look at a couple ways to overcome these barriers, but really, clarity on what you're buying and how you can account for that is essential. And this supports the concept of book and claim. So also in Canada's Aviation Climate Action Plan, it says that Canadian air carriers could also use book and claim, a system being developed by industry to match demand with supply from different locations. So this works for the air carriers, but it also works for producers. This efficiently connects customers with supply. It also allows supply to be used where it's being produced. This is efficient both connecting with a global customer base or an entire country customer base, and reduces on the transportation emissions once the fuel is produced. I'm going to talk a little bit more about book and claim in these following slides. So this is where COSAFA is working on SAF accounting, and I'm going to explain what this means. When I look at SAF, I see SAF is actually two products. SAF is on the right here. You have the fuel that burns just like jet fuel. The emissions reductions come from the feedstock and production processes. So SAF as a fuel is fungible with jet fuel and can be purchased and traded the same. But you also have an environmental attribute. This is why SAF costs more. You're actually buying a second product. And that environmental attribute, it represents that increased environmental benefit. If SAF costs more, how do we gain value from what that second item that we're buying is? And that is through using it for incentives and mandates from producers. Operators are using it to meet regulatory compliance and ESG reporting, and corporates are using it for ESG reporting. So this is actually showing two things: how you gain value for that second product, but also how you can spread load the cost throughout the SAF chain of custody for that second product. In order to do this, you need a clear understanding and clear rules of how you can transact an environmental attribute. So here we have a graphic that represents book and claim. SAF is blended with jet fuel and can therefore use the same logistics infrastructure as what jet fuel uses. It's a drop-in fuel. So in this top row, we show the SAF being blended with jet fuel being sold to the aviation customers. It can be sold like jet fuel. The second row is decoupling that environmental attribute. So that orange box represents the environmental attribute, that increased environmental benefit that comes from the feedstock and production data. That separate product can be sold to those same customers on the right. So also I'd like to say that that can be at a different location. And so this is how it works for a producer. If a producer makes SAF on the west coast of Canada, they are not only limited to customers on the west coast of Canada. They can sell that fuel as traditional jet fuel, decouple that environmental attribute, and sell those benefits to somebody that might not have access to SAF flying out of Montreal if there was no SAF available. So it provides a larger customer base for those SAF producers, and it provides access to those who are willing to pay the environmental premium for SAF, access to a product that they might not have the physical ability to put in their aircraft. In order to support this, you need rules that understand those markets. So we are talking about generally accepted accounting principles for SAF transaction. This provides the clarity on what you're actually buying. It needs to be recognized that these markets are supported under different regulatory agencies, and they need to be interoperable. There are several registries already in existence operating in these book and claim type transactions. They need to be interoperable to prevent double counting, double claiming, double selling. And there's varied compliance requirements. Sustainability is regionally dependent. We need to be able to support those differences on a neutral basis for feedstock and production. So COSAFA's mission, we are developing these generally accounted principles for SAF transactions, supporting and enabling all of the entities that you see here on the left. That's the entire SAF chain of custody. These should be publicly available, non-proprietary, designed and managed by the aviation industry and its stakeholders, the chain of custody. So it works within the way aviation operates. We're neutral on these feedstock and production processes, enabling markets to support investment in a wide range of these opportunities. To bring it back to an example, so I've talked a lot about markets. SAF transactions is markets, book and claim is a market. How do we support these markets, and how have markets traditionally been supported? So we can see this in financial markets with GAAP or the IFRS. There are accounting rules for publicly traded companies developed by a nonprofit board of directors that govern the way publicly traded companies are disclosed and operate. They provide confidence to the investors, the auditors, the governments, and they are recognized by governments, recognized by 167 governments. It provides the support for fair rules for financial markets, enabling those markets to grow. And so that's what COSAF is doing with the fair rules. We're writing a set of fair rules that will govern the SAF transaction markets by a nonprofit board of the aviation industry to support the chain of custody in this production. Auditors, governments, regulators provide that confidence that somebody knows what they're buying, they know what they can use it for, and they know that it hasn't been sold. And thus we can support book and claim and expanding those transactions and customer base. So that is really quickly. I'm happy to delve down more into what these rules look like. They were published in May. There's 60 pages online if you would like to read them. But really, I'm happy and excited to be here to speak with the regulators, to speak with the SAF industry stakeholders about book and claim. So I look forward to the rest of the conference and speaking with all of you.